Yes, you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. Enda here with you in the company of Juco James and Alan Morrison, aka Celtic by Numbers. It is Derby week. It is final week. Celtic against Rangers in the Viaplay League Cup final. I have to say, going into this, the Viaplay League Cup final does sound about as tin pot as you're going to get when it comes to these games, but it is a massive game. Let's not dumb it down because of the name. Celtic are looking to defend their title. Rangers are looking to take that off it and apparently win the third trophy given out in the last 2 years in Scottish football. Apparently, Rangers have won the last two, where I'm not sure where Mickey Beale has got that one from. But, I mean, if that's what he thinks, that's what he thinks. But we're going to be looking ahead to this game, and we're going to be looking ahead to what Celtic are going to be doing and a little bit on the opposition as well. Guys, how you doing?
Yeah, all right.
Good
Should
stuff.
be used to it now, and whatever is on Mickey's mind, he's going to open his mouth and let you know all about it.
Tell you what, it's just like he must just have a little monkey going around in his head, beating a drum every 30 seconds. I must say something stupid. I must say something to wind them up.
It's the old Homer Simpson, isn't it? It's always like a little monkey in his head, like Homer Simpson.
Well, it's just one of these things where it's for me it's actually a fantastic thing because I like being able to dislike the Rangers manager again because Gio I just kind of felt sorry for, whereas Mickey Beale just winds me up, and I can't tell if it's a genuine tactic from him or if it's just the way he is. I genuinely cannot tell if this is all for show or if this is just the way he is because, I mean, he's been in the background for so long, he's now in the forefront. So, but anyway, that's regardless to what's going on. It is League Cup final week this Sunday. Celtic take on Rangers. The first big test, I would say, James, the Celtic have had in a number of weeks. We've had a lot of hammerings in the last number of weeks, a lot of really good performances. But I guess this is the first weekend in a long while that Celtic will be tested properly. And it is a game that, you know, you're coming up against similar-ish opposition when it comes to standards, and you're coming up against a team that are looking to win a trophy. So this is going to be a real test for how good and how well Celtic are actually performing because it's going to be stress level tested this week.
Yeah, it's exciting in that way. Obviously within the context of the normal kind of nerves and all the other fun that come along with it. But, Rangers have been in good form since Beale took over. I did an analysis and a piece earlier in the week that basically looked at the underlying performances that, they've been kind of consistent with actually before Beale arrived with finishing being on the upswing. McGregor's been mildly less awful, but still pretty awful. And so, I think they've won 13 out of 14 under Beale with the one draw against us. And, that was a pretty close game that, obviously being at Ibrox is important context, but it's not as if, we looked dominant against them in that game. So, yeah, I think I mentioned earlier in the week, I mean, basically for 6 months, we play them 4 times, and most likely, assuming we play them in the Scottish Cup. And outside of that, probably looking at a lot other dominant performances. So this is one of the 4 big tests above and beyond it being for a trophy.
Mm-hmm. Thinking back to that last game, Alan, I guess the main feeling after that was that probably disappointment or, almost not anger per se, but real disappointment in the way that Celtic played that game because they were poor on the day. But there was also hope in it that Rangers needed to get something in that game. They didn't. And that was the worst that Celtic have played against them in probably 2 years. So the performance level is something that you're looking for in this game to be better than the last game, because if it's better than the last game, Rangers played all out attack. They tried their best to beat Celtic. They couldn't beat them at their best while Celtic were at their worst. So you have to think maybe going into this game that if Celtic bring their best performance, then they are strong favourites in this.
Yeah, I mean, as we always say, context is key. So remember 2 things about that. From Ange. One is he in a very understated way, but nevertheless in public, let it be known that there was a a vomiting sickness bug that had affected a lot of the squad, and the slightly surprising lineup certainly supported that. It's unknown exactly which players were affected and to what extent, but he mentioned it. He didn't make a big deal of it, but it was there. And then after the game, on what was, as you rightly say, quite a disappointing Celtic performance, he looked pleased as punch. There was no disappointment from him. There was no complaining about poor performance levels. And my reading of all of that is that he knew that he went there the squad went under extreme duress against a team that had to win. They managed to pull out a draw against the physical odds in terms of the well-being of the physical state of a lot of the players were in, and he seemed pretty comfortable about that. So I as I think I said at the time, from an analysis perspective, it's very difficult to objectively analyse that game, I think. And obviously the first game of the season was at Celtic Park. Van Bronckhorst was a manager, and Celtic won very easily. So in some senses, we're a little bit in unknown territory. This is now, Mickey Beale's got his feet firmly under the table. This will presumably be the team that he wants to pick and playing the way that he wants to play. And therefore it will be, in that sense, a slightly different test to what we've seen in the last two matches, I think, because I think Celtic obviously come into this with a 20-man squad that will be fit and rearing to go. One big difference, and obviously, with what I think are signs of improved cohesion, even over and above what we've already seen this season. There are signs that since the World Cup finished, some of the aspects of our play, especially off the ball actually, and defensively, we're becoming even stronger now than what we would have been even when we played the last game with a depleted squad, not in great physical shape. So I think that those are the contexts I would give to that. I wouldn't worry too much about that performance, Ibrox, in all honesty. What we're seeing at the moment is a very calm, measured Celtic team that seems very comfortable with itself and playing with a consistency. And this is the come back to. This is what we saw at the end of last season, from December, January onwards, and what we've seen pretty much all of this season, bar 2 games, is this consistency. It was an incredibly disappointing performance at St Mirren, and then there was a mitigating circumstances, as we said, at Ibrox. So apart from that, it's been pretty consistent. So there's no reason, therefore, logically, why we shouldn't expect something similar from Celtic.
Mm-hmm. I'm conscious of paying too much heed to the opposition during this podcast, but often it's easier to start with how they try to stop us rather than what we do, because inevitably it tends to land on Celtic unpicking what they did through really good play. But we'll start with Rangers in this game and then move on to what we think Celtic might do in terms of lineup and counteracting what Rangers are going to do. Because in my opinion, like, Celtic are the team that are going into this game as the main team, and it's up to Rangers to stop them, not the other way around. So we'll start with what the opposition are going to try to do here, James. Mickey Beale has taken over. The results have been good. Some of the results have been, in my opinion, if you just look at the highlights of the games, quite lucky along the way, to use a phrase that he liked to use about Ange a couple of weeks ago. They've come from behind a lot. They've gotten penalties a lot, unsurprisingly, and then they've scraped by in some of these games. But they have dominated in some of the games as well to put some balance into it. But it certainly hasn't been all clean sailing for them. It hasn't been a manager bounce where they just put in unbelievable performance after performance and build on that momentum. There has been some changes and some lack of momentum in it.
Yeah, and that's why I'd characterize what I'd said, that the results have been, good objectively. I mean, they basically matched Celtic over that stretch from a results perspective, but that the underlying performance data is pretty mixed in that regard. I mean, that the shift between the two managers, I mean, you'd think intuitively, because of winning 13 out of 14 with a new manager coming in, it was like, wow, things must have really changed and they must be playing much better. And the weight of the evidence suggests not been the case, whether it's been a timely red card or some penalties here and there. But they've been finishing better, as I mentioned, so that they have generally been finishing better. The one thing I would say is that he's shifted some of the roles and some of the kind of the allocation of who's doing what. He's been using Kent differently. I think arguably with some mixed results, but he's used Tillman more centrally and more of an attacking 8 position, and that has been paying off for them. He's actually been quite good under Beal. So whether he's available on Sunday will, I think, be one of the big variables here, because I think he is a potential, weapon for them, perhaps on set pieces being, one of the more problematic issues if he does play. So yeah, I don't think there's been a huge tectonic shift here. Now, again, in fairness, to your point, Enda, we try to be as objective as we can here. Raskin appears to be a good player. He's kind of just in the door getting settled. Cantwell, again, to me, he seems a more threatening player than a Lundstrom, let's say, meaning that if he's going to be more creative and he's going to
low bar, but
well, right, obviously, but similar profile. I mean, they're coming out of kind of the top of the championship, and that kind of level of player. So he's still kind of getting acclimated, and his role hasn't really been settled. He's been in midfield a little bit and out on the wing. So he's been using Sakala a little differently and more than Gio had. So there's definitely a mix, but what hasn't changed, and we talked about it, is that their back four, in particular their fullbacks, are, they're coming up high, and they're not as quick as they used to be, let's say. So that they still kind of get beat on the counter and in behind the fullbacks. And that hasn't really changed much. So, that introduces a lot. I mentioned it briefly on Tuesday, this chess match, as far as how both managers I think we know how Ange, for the most part, is going to approach things, but how Beal approaches things, I think, is going to be very interesting, because of some of these inherent vulnerabilities that they have relative to some of our strengths, getting in behind, for example, versus how aggressive he wants, to be. How on the front foot do they want to be, and kind of, because they are, let's call it from because there's 9 points behind, and we're the trophy holder in this competition. They're kind of the underdog coming into this. So do they want to come out and be kind of forceful in that context to try and set kind of a mentality? I think will be interesting. But yeah, it's the 13-0-1 is, I think, misrepresentative. There has not been a sea change.
Yeah, it definitely hasn't felt like that when you look at even some of the reactions from, the online support. That they definitely have not been blown away with what he's been doing so far. Alan, I guess one tactic that I would do, and one tactic that Rangers have done in the past for counteracting Celtic's midfield, is just kick them around. Silly little fouls, niggly little fouls, small ones. You'll get away with small ones in these type of games that just slow the game down, stop Celtic's momentum, stop them from developing any sort of structure within their game. And you worry, myself and James were just chatting about this off air before we started recording. If you're looking at Celtic's foreign player going into this is Rio Hatate, just stick on him, kick him around, bully him as much as you can, and hope that disrupts the play to the extent that Celtic can't get any momentum or rhythm within their game.
Yeah, I mean, we can see, even within the data and with our own eyes, there's a clear pattern in games where Celtic will get penalised for a lot of very innocuous contacts, whereas the reverse is rarely true. And so, you can get games where Celtic have 70-odd% possession and concede 15 fouls, and the opposition have the ball for 10 minutes and concede only 5. And some of that's to do with style of play. Some of it's to do with the aggression by which Celtic press and counter press. But some of it's to do with just slightly different criteria being applied to certain contacts, and we know that that's going to be an issue on Sunday. Listen, you can't fill your head as players, as managers. You don't fill your head with any of that stuff. We as fans can bitch and moan about it and point out the bleeding obvious, but it's a loser mentality to take that into the dressing room. You play your best game basically. And actually, some of the things that I think, to get back to the sort of approach to play, really, some of the things which I think Celtic have maybe, I say struggled. I mean, even last season, they eventually worked out how to beat most teams. A lot of teams go 5 at the back, 3 in midfield, and 2 or a 5-4-1. They try and compress the centre of the field and force Celtic wide. But what Celtic have done since, certainly since, if you look at sort of the World Cup as the sort of watershed and look at pre and post World Cup, as James has rightly said, although things like expected goals are actually down, even the shot quality is down, volume of shots is kind of about the same or slightly down. We're not making the opposition goalkeeper make any more saves. So you look at all that, and also even our goal return is not gone up. So you look at all that, you think, well, we're getting worse. But actually, as James has also pointed out, there's a cost. There's a cost to the opposition to restricting Celtic only slightly. So to almost keep Celtic either at the same level or slightly regress in Celtic's attacking output, the opposition are having to give up so much attacking possibility because they're so concentrated on defence and so deep and so tight that the threat from the opposition, especially the sort of run-of-the-mill teams in the SPFL, is almost fallen off a cliff. So whereas Celtic's XG is down slightly, the opposition XG is down a whole lot. They're having less touches in the box, less shots in the box, etc. But there's another side of it as well, and that's Celtic are being more effective at breaking teams down. So what I'm saying is some of the underlying play is improving. We're not seeing the results yet on the scoreboard, and that should be a huge worry for a lot of the teams in Scotland. So what do I mean by that? I mean that our packing scores have gone up quite considerably by sort of 10%, more than 10%, sorry, actually creating more pack passes. That's more passes that take opposition out of the game. Our pack recovery scores, that's forcing turnovers in the opposition, has gone up hugely. So we're forcing more mistakes from the opposition because we're hemming them in their own half. We're taking more defenders out of the game. We're recovering the ball more. Our goalkeepers having to make less saves. And if you look at the sort of pressing metrics, which I'm hinting at there, is if you look at the sort of pressing, the sort of passes per defensive action metric, Celtic's has gone up from 822.22 to 9.92. So we're making more passes despite opposition pressure, and the opposition are making less passes and giving the ball away more in their own third as well, and their packing and the opposition packing score is going down. So all of those things are saying that underneath this truth that Celtic's attack looks like it's less effective, the actual underlying play is becoming more effective. We're finding ways to get through teams. We're not necessarily being forced wide. We're playing more passes centrally into dangerous areas in the box. Despite the numbers, the players are backing themselves to give and receive the ball in tight areas under immense pressure. And that's why I picked up on O specifically on our last pod, because he seems to have a particular skill set that allows him to take the ball under pressure and hold on to it under pressure and lay it off to somebody. That's how you break down teams that want to pack the centre of the field, which is what the Rangers will do. So despite the slight drop off in XG, etc., Celtic are being more effective on the ball. They're finding better solutions to get into the opposition box, and they're being more effective out off the ball. We're pressing better. Our press is better organised. It's more effective, and the more defensive the other teams get, the more pressure we can put on them. So that all sounds very positive, but I think it is, and I think actually there's there's a couple of hammerings coming for somebody, because I think at some point Celtic's XG will pick back up to the underlying metrics.
Mm-hmm. There's a comment in from Frank Brennan who says, without a doubt, they will be aggressive and in our faces. You can bet that your last dollar on it, or physicality, or near lack of it, will be yet again found wanting. I have to say I disagree with this, because Celtic have both aggressive players like Johnston, like McGregor, like O, for example, now. But Celtic's aggressiveness is a completely different type of aggressiveness or physicality that you'd expect from the underdog team. It's not going out and kicking players. It's not going out and getting stuck in people's faces. It's using the ball much quicker than them. Speed of thought, aggressiveness in the press, aggressiveness in going at teams. That's the type of aggressiveness Celtic has. Yeah, sure, they don't have a Scott Brown anymore, but they bring the game to the opposition, and that is an aggressive style of play. That is not backing off. That is, if anything, more aggressive than John Lundstrom going out and kicking Hatate around the pitch, in my opinion. But you mentioned the press there, Alan, and this is what I was going to ask you, is if you look at Rangers' strength that James have mentioned in the fullbacks and how far they push up, Barisic obviously has really good delivery from the left-hand side. Tavernier is a goal threat, especially from the penalty spot, if they get those. But you want to press and hone them in, because I know that Tavernier, if you press him, he has been found wanting. If you put him under pressure, he has been known to kick the ball out the sideline. Barisic has had numerous mistakes in these games, especially losing people at the back post. You want to keep them pinned in as much as you can and force them into longer kickouts for the Carter Vickers to dominate them in the air, sort of thing. That's where Celtic, I think, will win or lose this game, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be a little bit careful, isn't it? Whether we like it or not, this is a far better team than anyone else we face in Scotland, and therefore the better players and the more press resistant. Ryan Kent may not be much of a goal threat, but he's very good at taking the team up the pitch. Tillman is a big, strong boy with good technique. Can shield the ball. Camara is very press resistant, very excellent at really shielding the ball and getting the ball up the park. So it's not. I don't recall a game even under Ange where we've harried them to defeat. I think where we've done well is more on the attacking side with the ball. We've created overloads in good areas, and we've got runners running off of defenders, especially Barisic, to get into good positions. I think that's how we've done well against them, not necessarily through pressing, because I think they've got good enough players to be much more press resistant than any of the other teams that we face. But I'll let maybe James come in on that one as well.
Yeah, I'd agree, and it's again, I think we're we'll see how Raskin fares in this kind of environment. I'd be shocked if he's not their starting central defensive midfielder. In what I have seen of him, and just some of the stats I looked at him from his time in Eredivisie.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, in Belgium? Was it Belgium?
Belgium.
Okay, Belgium. Yeah, Standard Liège. That's what it was.
Standard. James.
Sorry.
Standard.
That's my central PA accent. Redneck accent. Apologies.
That was my Alex Ray accent.
He's pretty competent on the ball. So to Alan's point, Kamara too. I mean, this goes back to, I'll kind of tie the last two topics together, because the midfield is the area that I'm most concerned about.
Agreed.
And this is in totality because of all these issues with transition that we've had, and various aspects of relative athleticism, size, speed, and if I mentioned to Enda, Alan, before you came on, before we went live, I did a little digging on our friend Nick Walsh. Out of curiosity, again, just on how the tone of officiating might be, because irregardless of league or matchup, that's an obvious kind of objective consideration. And if you look at his, and again, I'm going off of a website, Who Scored, that tracks basic statistics. So again, none of this is advanced, but looking at things like yellow cards per game, They have 16 officials that have done games in the Scottish Premier League this season, the Premiership. And he is 11th out of 16 in his rate per game of yellow cards. If you do fouls per tackle, which is one of their metrics, he's 10th. Okay. So again, this is within the context of a Scottish league that the officiating is more permissive than general leagues. And he's in the bottom half to bottom third within that context. So if the strategy is to, kick the hell out of Rio Hatate on the margin, that probably wouldn't be such a bad strategy given who the manager or the referee is going to be. And that's, again, independent of any other kind of externalities that we could talk about. One of those being he is second highest in out of 16 in penalties granted per game in the VAR era here in the league. So again, sample size isn't huge. So that one, I just throw that out as red meat. But the other ones, the yellow cards, fouls per tackle, that lends itself towards being more, and that's even without considering the context that this is a derby and it's a cup final where referees are, I would argue, reasonably apprehensive to do too much early. And they kind of let the game shake out in the first 10, 15, 20 minutes. And they allow the physicality sometimes, to be more than they normally would. So, if it's Lundstrom or if it's Kamara or Tillman flying into tackles, that I would kind of expect that to be a base case, particularly in the first half hour. And I would guess that it'll be allowed for the most part, unless there's something really egregious. But it's more so something that might be a red that might end up being a yellow, and something that probably should be a yellow will probably just be a foul, and that kind of thing. But that's those are all layered on top of some of these other kind of just inherent issues around transitions, the press resistance that they have. On a relative basis, again, we're talking about compared to the other teams outside the Champions League that we've played, and that if it is some mixture of Tillman, Kamara, Raskin, Cantwell, there is a degree of speed, quickness, and size there that is a completely different animal than what we've faced domestically. So. So those are things that we need to exploit them in spaces and in the areas that, like fullback, where they're probably a lot, and their center backs, getting Kyogo in behind and those midfield runners in behind, that type of thing. Because I think it could be, particularly if they play the Christmas tree, as I keep calling it, formation, where they're very tight and narrow in midfield. That it's going to be, it could be rough going in midfield.
The great thing I just love about football is that some things just never change, no matter how far you develop on the field stuff. Like the absolute single-handed things that go along with football never change and probably never will. And to use very basic football language, James, what you were saying is, in the first 10 minutes, get stuck into them. Don't pick up any stupid yellow cards early on, otherwise you're on a booking and you're going to get done on the counter attack, and you can't put in a challenge when you need to put in a challenge. And just don't give the referee any reason to send you off. That's 3 very basic football rules that have been around forever and have, no matter what level of football you play in, they stand the test of time as well. So
yeah, but Celtic don't play like that. Celtic won't play like that. Celtic won't be going into the game and will not be telling the players to, get a reducer in the first 10 minutes. Right? He just won't, because he knows. He knows we'll get a yellow card, but B, also it's just not the way he wants to play football.
Yeah.
Right. Well, one thing that doesn't get remarked about the Celtic team is the level of discipline. Players do not get involved in things extraneous to the job that they've got in hand. They don't get involved in narking contests with the opposition players. They don't get involved with the referee. They don't get involved in running feuds. They'd get an earful from the sidelines if that was the case, I think. So they may try and drag us down to that level, but I don't think Celtic will rise to that.
And that actually, so, and I've been one of my joys of getting called a secret Hun and all these other things over the years has been because I don't like underestimating the opposition, and it's difficult to go through a number of prolonged one-on-one interviews like I have with Michael Beale and look at his CV to think that he's an idiot, right? This is a serious guy who is a student of the game. It seems reasonably intelligent, right? I agree with you, Enda. And I think Alan has said it too. I love that he's playing this pantomime villain role, right? That takes all of this up to several notches. But the reason why I bring this up now is if I take it at face value that this guy's not a moron, that it might actually be the opposite of that, a fairly intelligent guy. And you're looking at someone like Ange, and you're looking at this really disciplined side that you have. How do you try to mix stuff up? How do you try to get people off their game? Well, you play the role of a lunatic. You say things to try and get stuff mixed, get it in the mixer emotionally to get people out of that kind of robotic doing your job. How do you get people off their game? You talk smack. And so I'm not saying it's going to work. I suspect it won't. But that's again, context to some of the stuff that he's saying is I'm guessing it's probably to try and get, Celtic off of their game to a degree, to get people to lose their head a little bit. And I hope it, and I don't think it'll work, but I can't say it's a crazy thing to be doing.
So James, I completely agree with you, and I definitely see our part of what we do, is not, like you say, not to underestimate the risks, etc. On Beale, there is the option that he is just an arrogant prick, and a lot of the evidence suggests. I mean,
I don't disagree with that.
This is the guy who was coaching under 11s. And feels he's good enough to walk away from the first professional club that gave him his big break in Queen's Park Rangers, at the drop of a hat after preaching loyalty to the squad. That this guy is, in terms of self-confidence and ego, is way, way out there. So I wouldn't put it down to clever mind games, particularly in that instance. I agree with what you're saying about approach in terms of what you're talking about is the go-to strategy, as Enda said, for any underdog in any cup tie against an opponent who's just set on attacking, and it makes sense at a very practical. But this is almost like a football truism to say that doesn't require, sort of Bill Shankly levels of, voodoo and insight into the opposition or anything like that. He's just simply an arrogant prick, I think.
Well, here's the thing. It really is all dependent on the result at the end of the day, because if Rangers go on to win it, then his mind games got in the heads of the Celtic players who forgot about their roles and they didn't do them to the same level. And if they lose, Celtic did their talking on the pitch, and that'll be the narrative essentially afterwards. And we'll see at the end of the season. I think his season will be judged at the end of the season, probably not judged at the end of this game for sure. But just to keep things on the game itself, then what are we thinking from Celtic? We'll start with the midfield, because I think the back line is fairly clear cut. It's going to be Starfelt, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Johnson, and Taylor as the back four. In midfield, going to be Cal McGregor, going to be Hatate. And I think the final choice is probably quite as interesting as it has been since the start of the season, because you've got Aaron Moy, who's in good form, O'Reilly, who has been picking up his form in the last 2 to 3 games. It's probably the two main ones that you're going to be battling out for that position. I don't think Turnbull is putting his name up for that position in this game anyway. So what are we thinking? Like, if we're talking about a physical game that, you're talking about Rangers and the counter-attack and transitions and things like that, then O'Reilly is probably a better option for counter-pressing, because that's what he does really well. But Aaron Moy, again, has been playing very well over the last number of weeks. So what are we thinking in that position?
So there's what I would lean towards, my preference, and then there's guessing what Ange might do.
Well, give me your preference. Don't give me what you think Ange would do.
Yeah, so my preference is probably going to be maybe surprising to some people, but I given this situation, um, I'd rather us go more. And again, it's always fluid, but generally 4-2-3-1, and I'd rather have McGregor and Moy. Again, because I'm my main concern here is our ability to lose or not lose control in the midfield, and lose that battle. And I think having McGregor and Moy helps us relative to being more press resistant, which is another big concern I have. And that kind of just stability in staying on the ball and maintaining possession, because it's in the transitions and the physicality of the midfield where if it gets a little more chaotic, that I have more anxiety as far as again within the context of the likely environment with the referee, where you get caught out a little bit and you turn the ball over and all of a sudden you're on a 3v2 with, let's say, Kent and Sakala and Morelos, and Starfelt makes a challenge that wouldn't be shocking in the world of Starfelt in a cup final. All of a sudden it's a red. You know what I mean? Like the risks here are they kind of layer on top of each other. And so that's I kind of defer towards the stability and the control aspect of Moy playing, two in the pivot would be my preference. And then basically then you have Hatate being in good form. He's kind of your focal point, roaming and being able to create. And when he does inevitably give the ball away, that you've got a little bit more resilience behind him. Hopefully that would be the theory anyway. So that's the logic,
and that
flawed as it might be.
Yeah, that's a loose structure as well, because you're saying 4-2-3-1, but
right.
In reality, all of these formations are just loose concepts that the players react to within the system. It's not really.
Yeah, it's just
you're playing 4-2-3-1 and you're there in that exact position that you're supposed to be every single time. It's more
right. But what generally what the distinction is when it's Hatate and O'Reilly is Hatate is not as deep as like a dual pivot would be. He's more in kind of tweener land, and O'Reilly usually is the one more aggressively pressing. And I don't think our risk reward on that is real great in this game. Meaning I don't think we're likely to get, it's all conditional probabilities, but I don't think we're likely to get as much out of our press with O'Reilly and Hatate as kind of the midfield focal points and pushing that to make the risks in transition worth what we might get out of it. And therefore I'd rather just be more reserved. And if you're going to do that, I think Moy is, the preference.
Yeah. Playing between the lines is what you're supposed to say now, James. That's it's correct terminology in football speak. Playing between the lines is what Rio Hatate does very well. In the half space. Yeah, in the half spaces, on the half turn, and have more than half a brain. What do you think, Alan?
So I agree that the midfield is the area of greatest concern. So I did a piece that's not out yet. It was one of these tabloidy pieces where I just went through the starting 11s and did a sort of man for man compare. But what was interesting, I'll come to the midfield in a second, but what was really fascinating for me on that is I used StatsBomb data. This wasn't my own data, it was StatsBomb data, right? And what was absolutely clear was that man for man, Celtic's back five are way stronger than their back five. Man for man, McGregor is letting in way more goals than he should. Johnston is, Johnston doesn't have the attacking output of Tavernier, but he's so much better defensively. You'd think that Goldson and Carter Vickers would be quite a close match. Nope. Carter Vickers is way stronger. Ben Davis is I think him and McGregor are their weak links, right? Ben Davis does not compare well to Starfelt. We've spoken about Starfelt at length, and Taylor profiles slightly better than Barisic. So, to me, to my mind, coming back to the midfield, where I think the midfield is more problematic, the player's profile, it's a tricky one. Can you really compare Lundstrom and McGregor, for example, because they play quite different roles? And actually, obviously, Lundstrom's far better defensively than McGregor is, but clearly you've got this whole notion of how the team plays and the sort of momentum and the pace and the McGregor gives the team. So that's a tricky one. This isn't me. This is StatsBomb, right? StatsBomb says that Tillman's attacking output is better than Hatate's. Don't shoot me. That's what StatsBomb says. Okay. And then with O'Reilly, let's say if you're comparing him to, it's a difficult one because you can't compare him to Raskin because Raskin's only played like 90 minutes or something. So midfield is a tricky one. And I was interested in what James was saying. I think if you're going to go to a double pivot, more of a 4-2-3-1 basic starting shape, then do it properly. Put Iwata in with McGregor, right? Because that's what his job is. Because actually, Aaron Moy's form has been terrific as a forward playing number 8, getting into the box, playing quite high, and creating trouble with his range of passing. So I don't think we'll do that. I think the way to win this game is to attack their back 4, to back 5 really, as much as possible. I think O'Reilly is probably the most adept in terms of pressing the opposition defence, playing little passes into Kyogo and into Jota and so forth from outside the box. So I would go with O'Reilly for this game. I'd have no problem if Moy comes on after 60 minutes with his cigar on just to see it out. That's fine. But the key to me to this game, because I think Sakawa with his pace and Kent running at you, and Tillman's skillful player, he gives the ball away a lot, but he can make things happen. I think you want to kind of have them on the ball as little as possible. So the way forward for Celtic is to attack their defence as relentlessly as we can. And easier said than done. And I take the point about the counter attack, etc. Of course, but I think we have to relentlessly put pressure on their defence. That's where we've ended up with 3-0, 4-0, is we've put their defence under pressure. We've created overloads. We've got people into dangerous positions, and that to me, that's the way forward for Celtics. We've got that's really their weakness across the back 5.
Yeah, I'm going to clip that Rio Hotate thing, and I'm going to snip out the parts where you say that it's StatsBomb, so that it sounds like you saying it's me, shoot me. Instead of StatsBomb. So
I've got the because I can't share it StatsBomb data because it's the Celtic way pay for it. So otherwise I wouldn't be putting it out anyway because it's just not worth my time to do so. But I have the evidence, and I can. If people want to DM me politely, I might share it with you.
So I said in the outside of this that we weren't going to go too long. It's 43 minutes in, and I think there's at least another 10 things that I'd like to touch on. So, but we won't touch on everything. One thing that I do want to touch on, I guess, is your reference to the attack line, and that is who is going to start up front. Because I'm going to throw something in here. We've got a young guy who's lethal at finishing, lethal at taking chances, has been the absolute bane and embarrasses his whole for the last number of games in this fixture. Are we going to start him up front? Are we going to start him on the right wing? You guys know who I'm talking about. Liam Scales? No.
I would be surprised. I think it'll be Maeda.
I'm talking about Abada, by the way, for anybody not aware of who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think it seems fairly self-evident, as Alan is apt to say. Ange is a pretty straightforward, open book kind of guy, and you can kind of infer with what his decisions are, what his kind of pecking order is. And I think it's been pretty clear with the relative lack of starts that Abada's had in recent weeks, in deference to Maeda and Jota, that they're kind of the top of the pecking order. Throw in to that the context that this is a final and a derby. I just would be, I guess, I mean, who do you drop? Because again, I guess in theory you could argue you drop Maeda and put Jota on the left, because that creates that vulnerability in that matchup potentially with Tavernier. and Goldson on that side. But my guess is Maeda and Jota, which again, I'm actually open to either. Like, I think there's a very reasonable argument to be made for both iterations. Everything from the idea that prefers Jota on the left, and to your point, Abada seems to be a guy about moments. We've talked about it over and over, and cup games and particularly finals are oftentimes about moments. So I wouldn't be averse to that version either.
Well, you've got him off the bench as an option as well if things aren't going well, if you wanted to change it up. I think the nightmare scenario for Celtic at the minute is the fact that Abada is really good at arriving late at the back post for crosses. So in the ideal world, you would have somebody who's good at crossing the ball like Jota on the left to get those balls across. But with that, you're losing the press and the mobility up front that Maeda provides with those runs in behind that Greg Taylor has been picking out. I think he probably climbs up the packing scores with those, Alan. At this point, it's like a set move that Celtic have these days, is that little ball from Greg Taylor in behind for Maeda to run onto. But you're also losing the pressing ability of Maeda as well. So I don't know. I definitely wouldn't rule out Abada starting in this game for the sheer fact that nobody is undroppable within the Celtic team and everybody is a starter ability wise. Mainly in the main part, you have most positions we have two players who are pushing for the same spot. So yeah, I think I wouldn't rule out Abada, but I think it will be probably Maeda and Jota. The final man, Kyogo, I presume he's starting up front. I presume we're going with that Alan rather than O.
Oh yeah, or no.
Oh no.
No, yeah. No, it'll be Kyogo. And listen, it'll be Maeda and Jota. Like I say, I don't think there's any mind games or tricks that I'm just trying to pull here. Remember, Jota's pretty good at arriving at the back post as well. We've seen that.
That is true.
Recent times, that header against Dundee United,
Maeda's getting better at putting the ball across the box.
Maeda's attacking the byline. I mean, it's what I was taught to do as a kid. Attack the byline, cut it back, hit it low across the box. Maeda's getting more and more confident, and we know that Tavernier is a lot quicker going forward than he is going back. So get him running backwards. Chasing Maeda is something that we definitely want to do. And as you rightly say, Greg Taylor's perfecting that beautiful sort of inside pass between the half spaces to release them. That's a thing of beauty. So hopefully we'll see a couple of those as well. But no, I don't think there'll be any surprises. I think the only doubt will be that whether Moy comes back in or whether O'Reilly keeps his place. I think O'Reilly will probably keep his pace, and otherwise it'll be Kyogo in for Owen. It'll be the same team as played last week. Then we'll see how many mind games. But I don't think it really changes. Whatever players they have, injured or not injured, they've got a 33-man squad for that reason. I'm sure they'll pack it with pretty much like for like anyway.
Mm-hmm. I think the correct way of saying that is that Greg Taylor has gotten better with his lateral passing through the half space for Maeda on the half turn to get low and high opportunity chances in the final third of the opposition box. I think that's it's
quite a funny end. I think I detected today on Twitter amongst people that are sort of worth following in terms of football analysis that there's a bit of a pushback against those who write in a way which make it sound like an academic journal rather than writing about football. There's been a bit of pushback against that, which it's quite interesting.
Listen, I appreciate what they do and I appreciate the work, and I find the work interesting. I'm just like, just say it in the simple terms. Like, you're not saying anything different to what people have been saying for the last 20 years. It's the same thing. You're just saying it in a different way.
Small
it's
child
like
gold. Absolutely.
You just if you want to see what this is all about, look at the way that people talk about Sean Dyche and then go watch Sean Dyche explain the 4-4-2 formation. It's just, he explains exactly what these guys are doing in simple language, and for me that's what the best coaches are able to do, because what like do foreign players who barely speak English, are they going to understand what the fuck you're talking about when you're talking about all these different football terms? But anyway, I'm not going to go into that rant.
Write for themselves, some people write for other people, I suppose. I mean,
that's true. I'm not having a go at anybody.
No, I know.
Right, I guess that's where we'll kind of start to wrap this up. What are we going prediction wise then? Are we doing predictions for this game? Do we want? I know you love making predictions. I haven't made you do them in a long time. I think the Champions League was the last time I've made you do any predictions. And on that note, should be noted, look at the results in the Champions League this week. RB Leipzig putting it up to Manchester City, and Real Madrid destroying.
Enjoyed
Liverpool
Real
in that
Madrid's
second half.
performance. That was wonderful.
Oh my God. It really puts into perspective what we were up against there. That was just too, like, RB in the second half, especially Timo Werner, they were absolutely exceptional. Like, these are two top level quality teams that Celtic came up against in the group stages. So, I mean, it really puts into perspective what we did. But anyway, predictions.
Go on, James, you go first.
All right, so I'll be. I'll say we're going to win on penalty kicks. It'll be 2-2 in regular time, 3-3 after extra time, and then Rio Hatate will take the 5th penalty and win it with a shot off the post that bounces off of McGregor's head and goes in.
I'm detecting a slight sense of sarcasm in your prediction.
Slight. No, we should win. I mean, but I do think there will be some goals. So I'll say Celtic 3-2.
Alan?
Yeah. So listen, Celtic have got the better players, the better squad, the better manager, and the more coherent system, right? But we all know in a cup tie that can not always get you the result. So, having said all that, though, I just think there's a confidence, a calmness, a sort of quiet certainty about the way Celtic are playing at the moment that I find difficult to imagine will get so thrown off our stride. Even if we go a goal behind, I don't think you'll see panic. I don't think you'll see a change of approach. I think you'll still see, if I say calm and methodical, that's not quite right. We'll still see an intense attacking football. So, there are of course going to be some variables that we've got to throw in. We mentioned the refereeing earlier. That inevitably, at some point, will have an impact. But I think Celtic will win, maybe 2-1. I'm hoping 3-1.
Mm-hmm. Ever the optimist. I think it was it the 4-0 win? I always get confused with this because I was out of the country at this point. I was still traveling. It was the 4-0 win at the very start of the season, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So do you remember the intensity that Celtic brought in the opening 20 minutes of that game? That's what I'm expecting in this game.
Yeah, my memory of that game was that Celtic never had to get out of second gear, as the cliche goes. We scored early. We got 3-0 lead quite early in the game, and it was just so comfortable. And it was really just sort of fending them off with a it was just so comfortable. That was my memory of that game. I might be completely wrong, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I was in Monaco for that. That's where I was watching the game, so that's why I was like a hazy enough memory. All I remember is Celtic blowing them away, and that's sort of what I'm expecting. And maybe I'm being overly optimistic. I'm expecting Twitter to be a shit show because of the referee, regardless of what happens. I'm expecting a Rangers penalty at some point in time, but hopefully my prediction is going to be 3-1 by the end of it, and Celtic to reclaim the trophy after last year. And yeah, that's where I stand. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being overly confident. I do think it's going to be a tighter game than they have been in the last couple of years, but I think Celtic will still be dominant when it comes to the real action in the game. They might get kicked around a wee bit, but I think when it comes to the football, Celtic are going to be playing most of it on Sunday. So let us know your predictions for the game in the comments below, and like the video as well. Loads of people liking it already, but do make sure to like the video and subscribe as well if you're not subscribed to the channel. We'll be reviewing this game at some point next week. We're not really sure what day yet, but probably Tuesday or Wednesday, potentially Thursday if things really catch up on us, but it'll be early on in the week, and we'll let you know on our social channels. Huddle Breakdown is where you can get us on Twitter. And if you want to get the podcast, it'll be available in iTunes and Spotify as well. James, Alan, enjoy the game. Hopefully we are talking about a win next week.
And you.
Thanks. Enjoy, guys.
Yeah, and enjoy to everybody who is watching and on YouTube and leaving comments below. Keep the comments coming, and enjoy the game on Sunday. We'll chat to you next week. Good luck.